And we are live. Hello, my name is Paulo, and I'm your wannabe comics historian. Just like I did the last time, I thought I'd go over my old comics. And while I focused mostly on the small format comics that we had in Portugal when I was young, I'm still sticking with the Portuguese language comics. Most of them are made in Brazil, but this time I think I'm going to go and show you a few more special editions and graphic novels. The way that different types of comics were made. Not only Marvel and DC were published like this, but also stuff from Epic and Vertigo and Dark Horse. We had a few. I think I have one Image comic here. Didn't bother getting out more. Last time I showed Wildcats issues 1 to 4, and Wildcats and Cyberforce were basically the first non-Marvel and DC that I bought on a regular basis. But over time, when I was building up my collection, I made sure that I got some of the stuff that was available and that I didn't have a chance to pick up when I was 10, 11. And we have a visitor. Hi, Comic Rack is in the house. How you doing, Terrence? Well, since you're here, might as well get this show started. Before I go to the Brazilian comics, recently, in the last couple of months, I've been spending a lot of time in the foreign comics news Facebook group, and there it usually focuses on foreign editions of Marvel and DC comics, and sometimes I show off other stuff because uh, I think that American comics fans in general are not very inquisitive, and they don't try different stuff, and they don't know what other things are getting published outside North America. And while I find the search for foreign editions of American comics interesting, I think there should be a way to expose the English speaking world to different sorts of editions. So I took this out by the foreign comics group. These don't count as foreign comics because they are an Italian comic in its original Italian, which I bought in Italy. Diabolik is, of course, more famous in the English-speaking world for the 1960s movies Danger Diabolique. Um, and there, I think there are Portuguese editions of this comic from back in the day, but I've never seen any. I remember buying these at the airport, this one and also this one. They're kind of paperback sized, which actually makes them easier to pick up. They're relatively cheap. Most of these are reprints. They have an art style that's easy to follow, but since the comics are very small, they only usually have 2 or 3 panels per page. Still, the Italian artists, they usually have a style that is easy to assimilate for people who are used to American comics. So I think it's a shame that the Italians don't export their stuff too much. Most of the things that most of the fans that the Italians have outside their own country are in Brazil, where there's a large community of people of Italian descent, and they're actually the ones who founded most of the comics publishing houses that exist in Brazil, and so there are one publisher that's famous in Brazil for doing Italian comics. I've already shown a couple of these the last time I spoke about the subject. I have a video solely on Italian comics, the versions that I had. Most of them are Italian, but a few of them are Brazilian. And lately we've been having a few series, a few select issues being published in a deluxe or hardcover format here in Portugal. Samuel Trejo is also here. How are you doing, Samuel? I haven't seen you in a while. I don't think you've been doing videos either. So one the publishing house that is mostly associated with Bonelli Comics is Globo, and while most of their comics are the same digest size that Diabolic is published in, the Bonellis in Italy are actually slightly bigger. Their version, but the global version of Tex or Zaguar is smaller. So the only one that they published in the original Italian format is the science fiction comic Nathan Never. They unfortunately it only existed for 8 issues. I bought these a couple of years ago. The character was designed by Claudio Castellini, who is more famous in the English speaking world as the artist for a Marvel versus DC crossover. So after issue number 1, he only did the covers, which are very expressive. Once more, a style that would be easy for Americans to pick up. I know that Dark Horse published 4 issues of Nathan Never about 20 years ago. It's been that long. They did Nathan Never, Dylan Dog, and Martin Mister, which they published as Martin Mystery. There's also a Martin Mister animated series, a bit smaller in size than the trade paperback. Yeah, these ones are halfway between a paperback novel and the regular U.S. comics trade paperback. This is issue number 6. This comic is science fiction. Sometimes it doesn't look like it. It does more here in issue number 7. And Nathan Never is a member of Agenzia Alpha, the Alpha Agency, peacekeeping organization in the future. And this is the issue number 8, which was the last one that they published. A friend of mine is helping me build up the collection. He wants to have a full Italian run. So he sold me his 8 Brazilian issues, and he's getting some other ones that he already has. Repeated. He's been selling them to me. One thing that I forgot to show. So, for example, here, this is the back cover, and there's always the next issue blurb. But of course, number 8 being the last one doesn't have it, only a pinup of Nathan Never. The design kind of looks a bit like Justice from Marvel's New Universe, which was also something that I liked. Okay, so I promised to show a few special editions outside regular Marvel and DC. Let's see what we got here. Well, I guess I'll start with DC, but something that's outside the regular universe, an Elseworld. This is the Brazilian edition of Gotham by Gaslight. While Gotham by Gaslight is usually recognized as the first Elseworld, the original printings don't have the Elseworlds logo, and likewise, this one is missing the Túnel do Tempo logo, which Editora Abril devised for Elseworld editions, which were mostly in Brazil. They were mostly Batman centric. There are very few Elseworlds that are published with other characters. There are a few, although there are a few special editions at a later date that do feature Superman, but during the 1990s they were mostly about Batman. I think I have another Batman around here. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, although it's not an Elseworld. Oh no, it is an Elseworld. This was published by Opera Grafica, a small publisher that does specific issues. So, Batman Phantom Stranger. They translated the name as Vingador Fantasma, which is not a direct translation. Probably have, but I picked up a few comics, but then I haven't ordered them, and I was going to show them in whatever order I felt like. So let's go for Epic Comics. Editora, both Abril and Globo published Epic editions. And if you are better known than others, historically they became better known. Um, in the late 80s, Epic was having some troubles with they never had any regular hit that caught on with their initial offering, even if they had people like Jim Starlin involved with the first comics, or Steve Gerber. So eventually they caved in and did some special stories with Marvel Comics characters. The most famous, of course, being Elektra Assassin, and also Silver Surfer Parable with art by Mobius. But my favorite is definitely this one, which is Wolverine Havoc Meltdown. This was published actually twice. They, if I'm not mistaken, the first time it was in 1989, and then again republished in 1991. I think this is the 1991 version. No, this is the 89 version. So yeah, this is the original printing. Pretty good with art by Kent Williams and John J. Muth. In dealing with the here's the opening splash page. And this painted art with the lettering that the Brazilians used, sometimes it looks a little bit off kilter, but it's what I get. It helps making the seem that it's something out of the ordinary. One thing that the Brazilians did when they started doing U.S. format comics was that, for all intents and purposes, these were not regular. These were deluxe editions. This is the deluxe logo. Usually held for mini series. This is issue number 2. I think the choice of Havoc and Wolverine is kind of odd at first. They've never been friendly. They've hardly been teammates. In fact, when this story was published for the first time, regular chronology hadn't caught up with Havoc returning to the team during the aftermath of the Mutant Massacre. But of course, since with the theme being Meltdown and Havoc being cosmically powered, and Wolverine being a secret agent, this was of course the most appropriate team. And Colossus at the time was unavailable. He had been injured during the Mutant Massacre. Issue number 2. Here's issue number 3. I just noticed that the price tags. I'll go back to show so I can show them to you again. And issue number 4. Now these were published monthly, which was rare for this type of miniseries. More usually, and Gore Vidal is here. How you doing, Gore? Uh-huh. And yeah. Yeah, Gotham. Yeah, here's the thing. Gotham by Gaslight had multiple printings, so I don't know why people insist on having the first printing. If they actually want to read the book, any version should do. So these were published monthly, starting from June to September '89, and during the time the Brazilian economy it was in shambles, with massive hyperinflation. So let's see if I can show the price here. This was the Cruzado Novo, which was a third attempt at stabilizing the coin. So this one was 350. 1 month later, 450. Can you imagine if you go with a $1 price increase? Nowadays, everybody talks about how expensive comics have got in the United States, and with this type of increases was terrible. Rayman is here. Yeah, no problem. The YouTube notification system doesn't work. So issue number one 350 Cruzado Novo. Issue number two 450. Issue number three 7. These were monthly price increases because of hyperinflation. The third comic costs twice as much as the first issue. And the final issue number 4 costs 10. Oops! Oh, here 10 Cruzado Novo, which means it's 3 times more expensive than the first one. Something that I bought a few years ago. This is a global miniseries, and it's practically forgotten nowadays. This was done by Alan Grant and John Wagner, with art by Mike McMahon. It's a sort of 2000 AD type comic that was published by Marvel, by the Epic division. The Last American, a very good science fiction story about in a post-apocalyptic world where only the main character seems to have survived, and then he keeps getting all these signs that there are other people around, and even the writing and the art seem to fool the reader into thinking that there are other people around, but ultimately we never find anyone else alive, and we don't know if the character is really looking for other people or if he's just imagining things. He only has a few semi-sentient robots to talk to, and they seem to have more common sense than the main character. You have that series in individual comics. That's good to know. The thing about this type of series is that they get memory hold, and not a lot of people go after them. If you're looking to read something different from back in the day, instead of trying to find the usual suspects and trying to build collections with the X-Men, Spider-Man, and Batman and Superman, which everybody has, you go through the back issue bins. If you see if you can find these in a pack, something like I think I have another forgotten series from Epic around, Crash Ryan. Also, nobody remembers that. One thing that I'd like to have is something called Steel Grip Starkey and the All-Purpose Power Tool. No, it's not a porn comic. Another special edition, a few special editions by DC here. Dead Man, Love After Death, by Mac Barron and Kelly Jones, issues number 1 and 2. These were published by Abril, even though they don't look like it. And it's once more an example of what they did with the deluxe format. I didn't buy these when they came out, and I never saw them, but I probably would have ignored them. I was completely unfamiliar with Kelly Jones at the time, and these were published in 1990. I was very much. I turned 11 in 1990. I was very much still a superhero fan. I never would have gone for a horror comic with such a what I at the time I would have said is a completely strange, ugly art style, but this was actually very, very good. Also, Batman: The Killing Joke, Brazilian edition. This was part of the graphic novel series. as part of their deluxe editions. This was the only regular title, so to speak. And while the first four issues feature Marvel graphic novels, with number five they decided on running the Killing Joke. The thing is, this one is not in the regular graphic novel format because the original Killing Joke is a prestige format book. It's just a regular sized comic with a spine, so it's not the same size as, for example, uh, the Silver Surfer comic, which is completely ripped. The cover is in terrible shape. As you can see, it's completely eaten around here. Did Dead Man get a reprint? I'm not sure. I know that there are Dead Man reprints, but I think they featured the original Neil Adams stories from the 60s, not the 90s. There were two 90s miniseries, and I'm not sure if they've been reprinted. This one is that excellent graphic novel with art by John Buscema in only in splash pages. But as you can see, both are graphic novels, but DC's is much smaller. The graphic novel was about the same size of this magazine called Aventura e Ficção. This was the Editora Abril's equivalent of heavy metal. The first, I've showed a couple of issues the last time when they were doing Marvel material. They ran an issue with Paradox and the NAM preview called Fifth to the First, which ran in Savage Tales Volume 2. But starting from issue number 14, they decided to focus on what's called here the best of worlds comics. And while they had some original material made by Brazilian artists, most of their comics came from the Spanish magazine CMOC, which has become one of my favorites. I'd like to buy more issues if I could. The first issues are in a black and white, but then they turn full color as they start adding more French and even American material. CMOC was published in a first volume, 10 issues in 1979. Then a second volume from 1982 to 1994. There are 176 issues. And they followed the Métal Hurlant and a heavy metal system of serializing comics or running short stories. This one I think is an original cover. No, wait, it isn't. This is a CMOC cover. And it features, let's see if I can get here, material by the Poles brothers from Catalonia. I think this is the last. This one ran the last American story, a Bucky Bizarre story by Steve Skeets and Steve Smallwood. Then there's the last African, a very famous story featuring Frank Capra by Manfred Sommer. Art story by Giral, and the Brazilian story by Mozart Couto. Let's see if I can show some. Okay, so this one story is from Morgan, a criminal in the vein of Torpedo. And Morgan, I think, is done by Jose Ortiz. Yes. Jose Ortiz and written by Antonio Segura. This is a story by the Poles brothers, and it deals with history. Other stories. Here, I want to show Frank Capra. I love Frank Capra. I have Frank Capra in several formats, and I'd like to get the full volume from Spain that has all the stories. Let me see if I can. Yeah. So Frank Capra usually starts his first comics. He's a war correspondent, so he's usually in a war scenario. He's in some nondescript African country with a civil war, which was typical of many regimes in many areas of Africa in the 1980s after decolonization, as the two major world powers vied for control and either supported the government or rebel forces. So Africa has always been a place of conflict because of that. An interesting short story. This was the one that was done by Giral. It's basically just a hunter, but it's interesting because it's mostly from his point of view. And this is the Brazilian story, written by Franco de Rosa, with art by Mozart Couto. Unfortunately, Mozart Mozart Couto missed out on an international career. He was being published in Brazil a few years before Mike Deodato became famous internationally, so he never had the he never became a household name or Roger Cruz or Joe Bennett. This is issue number 17 of Aventura Ficção. This one is an original cover made by a staff artist. It also features a Frank Cappa cover. A Frank Cappa story. Frank Cappa I think, is the character from Simak which had more features, much feature stories. Let me see if I can show this. Yeah, I think they ran 3 stories. This was their first big attempt at having an adult magazine with a different type of stories. And once more, Mozart Couto, a favorite of the publisher. They were really trying to see if they could get the Brazilians to get more regular work, because at the time the Brazilian industry was mostly made up, and it still is. It's still mostly made up of foreign material. And if Brazilian artists want to get published, they have to do so through smaller publishers, or self-publishing. I believe this story is from Savage Tales by Vince Waller, the guy who did Generic Comic. A bit harder to show. Let's see. And here's another Morgan story. There were 2 Morgan stories, and he was always in jail in them, which was not common throughout his run in CMOC. Here's another epic comic, the martial law one-shot Crime and Punishment. This was the one where they make fun of the Marvel superheroes. The original miniseries is much better than this one, because while it is a parody, it treats the subject matter like it's supposed to be serious. And here it's just making fun of the Marvel superheroes, which was probably the first time that somebody did it like this. And Garth Ennis's The Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe is basically a take on this one. What else we got here? Okay, so I'm going to show something, because I have this one twice in 2 different formats. This was the original printing, the first time that DC Comics Presents number 85 was published in Brazil in the Portuguese language. The famous confrontation between Superman and Swamp Thing. This Superman comic was published, if I'm not mistaken, 1985. No, 87. So they were going through Crisis on Infinite Earths at the time, but they decided to run this story. Let me see if I can show an art page here. Okay. So of course, with art by Rick Veitch, they ran this page next to an ad. I actually like showing foreign ads to comics fans to so they can understand the cultural context in which these comics were published. And of course, this one being an anthology, it also has Infinity Inc. That's not Spawn, that's Mr. Bones. And yes, the story was drawn by Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane created the Mr. Bones design and later created Spawn. And here's a Legion story featuring the Emerald Empress. Legion was always published in Superman at this time. Then they got rid of it because it didn't fit. It didn't fit with a post-crisis theme. So of course, so this being the first time that they published DC Comics Presents number 85, the story was famous enough. The Brazilian editors kept going back to mining Alan Moore's material, and this is a special edition reprint with a new translation. It's not a reprint. When a new publisher gets the rights to print a story, even if it's been printed before, they may not always have the right to use the same translation because it's also subject to copyright. So they have to come up with their own. Of course, being published in the original US format, it means that they can use the original lettering spaces. Of course, this one was also recolored. So of course, much sharper colors than what Editora Abril used. And this one is, of course, a one-shot, so it only has this one story. But it does feature a text feature about Superman. The publisher Opera Grafica. I'm not entirely sure who was behind the operation. I never actually looked at the Roberto Guedes. Yes. So what else is here? This one was odd. I can't remember why I bought this, and it even came bagged, which was not normal. But it's the Brazilian edition of a Marvel UK comic, Mystech Wars. It's got great covers by Alan Davis, but the story is absolutely terrible. I'm not entirely sure why they decided to do this. And even the art, see, the covers are much better. It's not actually Alan Davis. It's early Brian Itch trying to do his best Alan Davis impression, but inside the art is very amateurish. This is early career Brian Itch. It does not look like one would expect. And of course, it's just one mega crossover with all the Marvel superheroes being published by Marvel UK in an all-out war scenario. So I don't know why they chose this one to publish. At least Death's Head has more fans, and the stories were a lot. I wouldn't say a lot funnier, but they were funny on their own. And this one is just a complete mess. I'm kind of interested in Dark Guard because it's early Carlos Pacheco, but it's also not the best one. So what do we got here? Okay. Should I show this one? Yeah. So in the early 2000s, a new. We started finally having a regular publisher for Marvel in Portugal, and they never got the rights to DC. Although eventually they published some DC stuff. They were called Devir, which is a Brazilian RPG house, and they had an office in Portugal, and they hired and they got the rights to Marvel, but they had to publish in a US format, which eventually was too expensive and proved to be the demise of superhero comics in Portuguese newsstands. Basically, US comics from then on would always work better in bookshops in collected edition, preferably in hardcover. But during this time, they without since they couldn't publish DC and a lot of the Dark Horse rights were also tied up with the Brazilians. They got the rights to a resurrected Metal Hurlant. Now they couldn't use the name heavy metal in the United States, Humanoids. So Humanoids decided to use Metal Hurlant for the U.S. market as well, and the Portuguese edition ran for 5 issues. Unfortunately, it really didn't survive without any well-known characters in it. But it's got some interesting stories in here. This is a Jodorowsky story. Not Meta Baron's related. There's a Meta Baron story in here, but not this one. And you can tell that this was not made for a US format. The art is very small. The lettering is also reduced to almost unreadable. This was an interesting story by Kurt Busiek with art by Gerald Parel. And you don't know it, but it's a werewolf. And he lives in an airplane, in a supersonic airplane that's going around the world, always making sure it stays in daytime so that he does not get turned into a werewolf. So there are flashes of his previous life, with him becoming a werewolf and losing control, and then here in the airplane, always running from himself. This one is a more humoristic story. Day Off by Pierre Vazem. These humoristic stories, they were always used as fillers by heavy metal, but there are some very interesting humor artists in France. The majority of best-selling comics in France are actually humor. They're not adventure. Mobius is not the most famous French artist in France. That would be the recently deceased Albert Uderzo from Asterix. We also have here some. Let's see, Fred Beltram. Where's the Fred Beltram? Beltram? No. Ah, the last story featured finally the Meta Baron. So it was made specifically for this comic. So it's not part of an album. I don't think they were interested in running serialized stories here. So this one has an ending. This was issue number 2. Jeff Johns and Christian Gossett, Red Light, an entirely red comic. See if I can show the art and if it's easy to read over the screen. Christian Gossett worked on what was that comic called? Red Star. which was the first comic with computer generated backgrounds that you could not tell were computer generated backgrounds. Okay, the Invasion. This is a Jodorowsky story with art by Branco. Branco is a Ukrainian artist living in France. So here's some pinups by Fred Beltram. How you doing, John? And I think we have okay. So I think this story is by Book, Francois Book. Yes, very mundane. But it was written and drawn by Book, which was not normal at the time. Another magazine that these guys tried to publish was called Comics. It's a bit thicker and expensive at the time. It cost €6, but it was 100 pages. And the type of stories that they ran, they varied. They also had a lot of news and text features. Which made this a more complete magazine. They were trying to see if people who were into the arts and literature would pick up the magazine. This is a report on the Amadora Comic Con. Mostly text. So these guys here are the editor and they were editor and translator for Devir at the time. They now run the G. Floyd offices in Portugal. This was them 20 years ago, so it's a Sin City short story. I think this came from Booze, Broads, and Bullets. More text features. And this is one more Enrique Beach. I think this is from Tomorrow Stories. So these stories came from everywhere. There's even European comic here. And it's a shame that this magazine also was canceled early on, because it was the best way we had to get different stories. And here's Bill, Comic Mag Musings. How you doing? This magazine also has an interview with Argentinian artist Eduardo Risso. So this was the type of magazine that we needed at the time and that nobody cared about. Also a short Kingpin story here. Actually, the Kingpin hardly appears in the story. It's about a goon who works for Fisk Enterprises. Brian Azzarello and Tim Bradstreet story. Very complete. There are only 5 issues of this comic. So, and they had the rights to Marvel and DC, and they also publish stuff like Wolverine. This one I like this one because it was a complete story. And I wasn't buying Wolverine regularly there. Okay, here's another one of those comics. This one is the theme was cats, so it features Sandman story, Let's see if I can find it. Hello, where are you? Shabute. Well, before I can find the Sandman story, something black and white with cats. All this issue is cats. Every issue had a theme, which may be why it was hard to understand. And here it is. Dream of a Thousand Cats. So I think this was the only time that a Sandman story appeared in a magazine format in Portugal. Kitty cover. Yeah. No black set here, but there was a. I think there was a. Yeah, there's a feature about Crazy Cat. The feature about cats in French comics. This for some strange reason is very famous in the French speaking world. It's called Le Chat, the cat. It's supposed to be funny. I never saw the humor, really. I don't understand. And of course, the much more interesting is, of course, Black's Head. And this cat appeared in a famous Enki Bilal series, The Immortals. Okay, so but what their bread and butter were the Marvel stories like X-Men stuff. They started publishing with Onslaught, so then they kept going. The Heroes Reborn and Heroes Return were a failure, so they stuck with X-Men, Spider-Man, and Wolverine, and of course Wolverine Origin. This is issue number 2. It ran as a 3-issue miniseries. They just stuck 48 pages in each comic, so easier to get. A few other stuff that I got. An issue of Generations. This was also published by Opera Grafica. So in a flimsy magazine format, so not quite like the original DC version. Savage Dragon number 1 from Editora Abril. And Spawn number 10. I got a couple of issues of Spawn, but I never quite understood what I loved about it. Now these ones I liked. Oh. Yeah, sorry, just more Superman and the failed attempt at doing an Avengers magazine during the Heroes Return. But these ones I liked, and they came out at a time that we were without Marvel. So I was about 17. I hadn't started reading. No, I already started reading. Yeah, no, I was about already 1920, and I'd already started reading in English. But I wanted to make sure that we had comics in our newsstand, so I bought them. Even if they were really hard to find. Nexus by Editora Mitos, which were the ones who published the Bonelli Italian comics after Globo. And Hellboy. I got a couple of Hellboy miniseries in the Brazilian editions before they were published in Portugal exclusively in album format. Yes, Grey Man, that was Mr. Bones. So let me get, and what else we got here? Oh yeah, and even this one came out, Hellboy and Ghost. I'm very glad that the smaller publishers took the opportunity to run these different things and to send their unsold comics to Portugal. Otherwise, I would never have gotten the opportunity to read this stuff because they were published in the US when I still was not reading in English. So so this is how I started becoming more knowledgeable about stuff. Books of Magic. The only time that I've read, no, it's not even that I've read in a periodical format. This was published as a magazine in the US. Books of Magic was a prestige format miniseries. In here, it's a magazine. So it's actually quite interesting that they chose to use a format that was easy to sell. But of course, it was a 4-issue miniseries, just like in the US. When did I learn English? I learned English when I started when I was 9. So I was fluent enough by the time I was 12 or 13, but I had limited access to foreign comics. I know I could buy newsstand editions of Marvels at the time, but I chose not to because I knew that those were brand new and that the Portuguese and Brazilian comics were 3 or 4 years behind, and I did not want to jump ahead. So it was mostly when Marvel went bankrupt, I took the opportunity. I finally found a comic shop in Lisbon, and that's when I started reading in English on a regular basis. Yeah, this one has Constantine and Mystery. This is the original Magic miniseries, and I can never miss the opportunity to show off a Phantom comic. I love the Phantom. The Phantom was probably the first. Yeah, I guess it was. It was the first adventure comic that I read. It was in my dad's the newspaper every day. But this is still pre-Cyberry material, and it has terrible typeset lettering, which was the norm in Portuguese comics at the time. So these were the special editions. How long have I been on? Almost an hour. I still had some formatinhos to show. I guess I'll leave that for tomorrow. If you guys want me to leave these for tomorrow, because I've been on almost an hour. So tomorrow I'll be here at the same time, midnight Britain, 7 p.m. Eastern, and I can show off a few more of the smaller format Marvel and DC comics. How about it? So since I've been on almost an hour, I want to thank everybody for stopping by. 8 people watching. I don't think I've ever had so many people on a live stream at the same time. So thanks, guys, and see you tomorrow at the same time. I will show those smaller comics, the Formatinhos, which is something that all the foreign collectors who are after when they want Brazilian issues. And so until then, keep reading old comics. And bye-bye.